All right, well, this is the fourth installment of the Dedication to the Craft series of photography segments on the podcast. If any of you out there that listen to the podcast follow me on Instagram, you see how much I like sunset photography. In the last few years, when I upgraded my camera to something much better, I started really getting into night photography and long exposure photography. The thing about sunsets and night photography is you have to do these shoots at dusk and after dark. And you may not know this, but there are animals that come out at dusk and after dark that aren't normally visible during the day. And me and my buddy Steve, when we go to do sunset shoots, after dark, long exposure shoots, we don't think about running into animals or running into any dangerous situations. We think about getting the photo. Dedication to the craft. I definitely, way more than Steve, have less regard for my own safety when getting a good shot. I've had times that I've gone places and gotten some pretty cool shots when I look back after the fact that I could have been seriously hurt or killed. I talked about the West Barnstable Brick Factory back in episode 68. I don't think I mentioned the fact that when I first went to go to find the remains of the factory itself, I ended up scaling this tree, and I was a good 20 feet up in the air above all the vines and such trying to find the facade of this factory, and I ended up almost slipping. I was hanging on to the branch. I could have easily dropped and been killed, and nobody would have found me forever because I was just deep in the overgrown woods. So this Dedication to the Craft, Part 4, is going to look at one specific danger, one specific animal that I have had several run-ins with during my photography career, and that is the lovely coyote. A quick overview, a coyote is a canine. It's a relative of the wolf. It's smaller. They typically top out at like 50 pounds, but they can be bigger than that. They normally shy away from humans, but there have been videos and such of coyotes kind of stalking people, so they're not something to be messed with. They eat both animals and plants. They're common now on Cape Cod, more so than I remember when I was a kid growing up. It seems like growing up in the 80s, there were few, if any, coyotes, seals, turkeys, and sharks, but they're everywhere now. When looking for sunset spots, places to shoot, especially in the summer where there's people everywhere, you have to kind of go off the beaten path and find places that people don't frequent or don't know about. Typically, these are heavily wooded, which means they're home to coyotes. So this leads to the first of my coyote encounters. It's a place in Brewster along the Bayside beaches. It's a lesser-known trail, but when you hike out there, it's a little over half a mile to get out there, but you get to these bluffs that overlook. The sunset is always good there based on the position of the trail and Cape Cod Bay and such. But this story, I remember Steve and I both went out there. Typically for sunset shots, we look to get out there half hour, 20 minutes before the sun goes down. That's when you really get the colors, especially if you got clouds. It's amazing. And what you do is you take a few photos, wait a few minutes, watch the sky change, take a few more, etc. Shooting sunsets is not difficult. It's just a matter of going out and actually doing it. When you go to the beach, if you're someone that likes to go and view the sunsets, you'll notice at the beach parking lots, there's a lot of people there standing with their phones in front of their faces, which is how everyone thinks they're a professional photographer these days. But what you'll notice is when the sun gets right to the end, when it sinks below the skyline, that's when people will leave. And that's where the people that know about sunsets and sunset photography, that's where they really make their money. So my buddy Steve and I will always wait 20 minutes after sunset before we leave. You get the afterglow. Well, the afterglow happens obviously after the sun sets at dusk. And at dusk, that's when the coyotes start to come out. So Steve and I got done shooting. It's pretty much almost dark out now. We're hiking back down the trail. It's a half a mile in the dark, essentially, to get back to my car. And that's when we start to hear the coyotes howling. And not just one, but at least half a dozen howling and talking to each other. And it's dark, so you don't know where exactly they are. all we could figure out was that the sound was between us and my car. So there's nothing that'll put a chill up your spine than a whole bunch of coyotes howling and knowing that there's a chance you may have to go through them to get back to safety. Obviously, nothing happened on that trip. I believe I said something sweet to Steve, like, oh, I'll just outrun you so the coyotes can catch you, which is there's the all for one, one for all of dedication to the craft. But it was scary in the dark with the coyotes like that. Man. Sometimes, though, interactions with coyotes, they're not as scary because you're not up close, but they're nonetheless kind of bone-chilling. I did a shoot after dark at the Cape Cod Canal on the Cape side. So you go up to Sandwich, there's the Canal Visitors Center. It's where the bike trail along the canal begins. And I wanted to get a shot of the power plant and with the Sagamore Bridge in the background. If you're not familiar with the canal, all these descriptions aren't going to make much sense to you. Just know that I was up there way after dark with my camera, with my tripod, and I'm just taking shots, long exposures, seeing how they look. This was probably late fall, so it wasn't that late. But across the canal on the mainland side is a place called Scusset Beach. It's a big beach park camping area. It's really nice, but it's also really desolate over there. And I'm on my side just shooting the power plant, shooting the bridge, and from across the canal you hear the sound of coyote, soon followed by a sound of something getting killed. I mean, probably a rabbit, but it was just awful to hear the sounds of this thing getting ripped to shreds, even though it was a couple 100 feet away across the water. Even now, I'm like, ugh, because I can hear the noise of the rabbit just being ripped to shreds. More recently, I was at Englewood Beach, which is in West Yarmouth. Again, after dark, just taking up some shots of the boats that are now there on the docks. And Englewood Beach is part of Lewis Bay, so the bay kind of circles around to Great Island. And along the water, there's obviously homes from the real rich people that put their McMansions on the coastline here on Cape Cod now. So we're talking several hundred yards away on the other side of the water. I start hearing the coyotes, at least 3 of them, just howling to each other. And in my mind, I'm starting to figure out how far they are and how long it would take them, even at a full sprint, to get to where I was. And I figured I had a good 4 or 5 minutes if they came charging me, but they didn't know I was there. And why didn't they know I was there? Because some little miniature dog or something like that started yipping at them from outside wherever the house was that the dog lived. So now we got 3 coyotes yelling at this little dog that's yipping back at them, and I'm thinking back to the rabbit story. So I'm waiting to hear this dog get ripped to shreds, and it goes on for a couple minutes before finally the owner of the dog came out. You could hear the guy yell, so the dog finally shuts up. He brings it inside, and that dog was lucky. 3 coyotes, woo. And no, they didn't charge me. They probably went the other way. My king of coyote stories that I dealt with during my photography trips has to be my Highland Light story from Truro. That place is very desolate after dark. It's on a golf course, but it's the National Seashore, so there's lots and lots of open land. I took my camera, my tripod, walked way out towards the bluffs and just taking photos of the lighthouse. At first it was right at sunset, and to my right, I could hear probably a dozen coyotes just howling and yipping at the sunset. At least then it was light out a little bit, but oh my God, like you're way out there. Like I said, in between me and my car, probably 1,000 feet, and you could hear a dozen coyotes yipping. So I wanted to go back to my car and warm up a little and wait for it to get really dark so I could get some long exposure shots of the lighthouse. So I went back and sat in my car for probably 20, 25 minutes. I had my flashlight when I walked back out as I took the trail behind the lighthouse. It's bordered by a fence on either side. You go out to where the observation deck is, like that area, if you're familiar with Highland Lighthouse. So I'm out there doing now long exposure shoots, 15 seconds, 20 seconds. And during one, it must have been a 30-second shoot, and I'm just waiting for the timer for the shutter to go off, and that's when I hear the same coyotes, at least a dozen, but this time they're now on my left and not my right, which means that in the time that I was in my car, they all migrated across the golf course. And I don't know how long it was after I walked back or how soon before I came back out that they did that, but it's pretty bone-chilling to know that all those coyotes were in your vicinity and they basically could have crossed your path at any time. So I'm waiting for the shutter to go off as I hear the coyotes like, come on, because I don't know how far away they are, because you can't see them. It's night. But it wouldn't have done me any good if a dozen coyotes came after me. There was nobody near there. I could have screamed all I wanted. Nobody would have heard me. They'd have just found my camera and my clothes. That's definitely the scariest one. That's one of the scariest shoots I've ever been on. Have you ever dealt with coyotes up close, or have you ever dealt with any other animals? And I mean vicious ones, not ones like deer that if you look at them wrong, they run away. There was a time that I was waiting to go live when I used to do my live streams for the podcast, that I was outside in my car and a coyote walked by my car at dusk and literally took a dump in the yard and stared at me while I was waiting to go live. There's nothing creepier than a big coyote staring at you while it takes a crap in your yard. But there you go. That is dedication to the craft number 4, the coyote tales. Let me know if you dealt with any vicious animals like coyotes, or maybe a rabbit was vicious and chewed at your feet. Who knows? Maybe you catch them on a bad day.